idea. I have no idea. Silvio Berlusconi, does that mean anything to the Russian, German, Italian axis? Absolutely not. That was blessed by the Popey Pope. The Popey Pope. And the Popey Pope's a big deal. Now, what else do I have to say here? Is there even news that happened in the last day since I'm making these MP3s? The German stock exchange is buying the New York Stock Exchange. That's a big deal, and everyone in New York's all ticked off about it. We've already discussed this. My listeners know that there's there's an eagle rising. There's an eagle rising, and that eagle is putting together the pieces and consolidating power. And there's also been a sellout. The Pink Rabbit Leadsters, been over a barrel, have sold them out. Whether or not there's a core group of bankers like the Rockefeller and Rothschild, there could be. There could be. I don't know how it's going to break down. We'll keep this going, but they've been bent over a barrel, and they don't have a new world order, so they've made arrangements, and I'm guessing the Germans are just buying themselves something. It's much better the Germans do it than the Chinese. It's much better the Germans do it than someone else. Now, what are they going to do with the New York Stock Exchange? Well, I don't even know if there's going to be. I don't know what all our plans are here. We're just going to have to take it from there. But this is just another episode of German soft power becoming a little too blatant. A little too blatant. And someone has been, well, we've talked about this before, financially. They've been pinned financially. They've been pinned 9 ways to Sunday. And this is just yet another deal. Now, there's a whole group that emails me and say, Horst, the Jews in Germany are taking over the Jews in America. And, Horst, the Jews. And I could go on one of their long rants, and I will maybe in one of the next MP3s, because it's a little ridiculous. There's a big difference between being an anti-Semite like me and being totally obsessed and not being able to see anything. Just walking around and doing these Jew rants, when they go down in the first round, you're going to feel kind of stupid. So kind of tone that stuff down. You know, there's a big difference between being an anti-Semite. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, obviously their elites hate us. No use in them hiding it. No use in hiding that we can't get along. No use in hiding your feelings, but you need to get over the obsession with everything being the Jews. The German Stock Exchange buying the New York Stock Exchange probably doesn't have as much to do with the Jews as you think. But you guys got to knock that stuff down. Knock that stuff down a couple notches, or you're going to feel probably dumb after the first round. And you've been warned. There's more to this group than meets the eyes, but they're a component. You got a piece of the puzzle. There's a difference between obsession with the Jews and having a healthy anti-Semitic reaction to a group that runs around trying to kill white rabbits. There's a difference. Knock off the obsession. Tone it down a few notches. You should see some of these rants that come in on the Jew rabbits. But from now, in the next little piece, I'm going to talk about some current events. I'm going to talk about Bye Bye Blackbird. And we're going to talk about the Norway spiral and what's really going on, what's coming down the pipeline. I'll keep you abreast of all the rumors and all the news, because I think a great deal of these rumors are by and large true in this case. Sooner or later, if white rabbits have the type of technology that I believe we have, we're going to start demonstrating it, but it won't be in an obvious way, because the technology is a little too, it's a little too broad for us to all get our minds around. But we're going to try to get our minds around it in the next little segment. I'm going to talk about some stuff right in front of our face. And before we do that, I'm going to go on a brief explanation, and we're going to talk about stealth. We're going to talk about how the Green Goddess, our Godzilla, has went into stealth mode here. We're going to talk about that. Okay, let's go to the wild side here. Let me answer some questions, or give my thoughts on particular recent events that are involving natural disasters, animal deaths, and next generation weapons. That believe it or not, many of the non-European groups on this planet are talking about it as if we have it, and as if White Rabbits is doing it. So let me talk to some Japanese listeners here and all the Far East listeners about these particular type of this physics that has been resurrected on this planet, for lack of a better word. And we'll go into some history of, because it's white rabbits typically do not understand how we operate. You really have to sit back and think about it, and I'm the same way. Let's go back in time for a minute. In the early 80s, there was a crazy Russian colonel. some crazy Russians had it in their mind that we had already had, in America, we had stealth technology, stealth airplanes, planes that could disappear off of radar, planes that couldn't be seen on radar, planes that were just as difficult to see on radar as a little bird. And this was thought to be absurd, ridiculous, and undoable. It was thought scientifically impossible. And in the late 80s, more and more Russians were talking about it, because Russians have very good intelligence, and they had talked about it as if we had it. In other words, this crazy Russian colonel, or whoever it was in Russia that first said we had it, based on his research, basically more and more Russians were coming on board. And then, of course, no American would believe it. Americans believed they were seeing UFOs or something. You know, white rabbits in Europe are saying, well, that's a UFO, you know, it's a little alien, it's not white rabbit technology. And then, of course, we have the famous event, the bombing of Saddam Hussein by the little stealth bombers, who basically look pretty space age, right? I mean, they're stealth technology, and they were unveiled in front of the world. But we don't unveil stuff in front of the world until we're ready to do damage with it. It's a concept, and I think you could do this over and over again, going back hundreds of years. If some king brought out some advanced longbow, he's not going to let his opponent know about it. You know, he's got some big crossbow on the battlefield. They're not going to let anyone know about it until it's too late, until they're ready to do damage. Now, there's some spy out there who probably knew about it ahead of time, just like that early Russian colonel. But, you know, that's just the way we operate, even when we don't realize we're operating like that. And we always underestimate our abilities. But non-white rabbits on this planet do not underestimate our abilities. If anything, based on our past, based on what we are capable of doing, based on what we have done, to them we're capable of anything, which is kind of interesting. They know more about race than most white rabbits. Fascinating stuff. But what I consider this next generation, this type of stuff that they're rolling out in front of us, and I believe they started the process of rolling it out already. Most people just aren't aware of it, except maybe in Japan, some elements are aware of it. There definitely some elements on this planet are far more aware of it. Different heads of governments in Latin America than any European. I believe you're in that state right now where it's getting rolled out and we don't realize it until they show it to us and tell us about it, but by that time it'll be too late. It's kind of like stealth bombers, you know, hitting Saddam Hussein. We're sitting like Saddam Hussein, and they're starting to pinprick all around us using this technology, and we just don't realize it yet. But I'm going to discuss some certain events and my ideals based on it. But there's always been, for this particular type of physics, what's called, some people call it scalar, torsion, electromagnetic weapons, EM weapons, Tesla howitzers, phase conjugate howitzers. You're dealing with a particular type of physics. The physics, I'll label it torsion physics, which is a pretty interesting, fascinating concept, and we're going to go into that, and I'm going to define it as we discuss the first event. Give you a simple explanation, or the one I use at least, to try to understand it, because I don't completely have my brain around it, but since I'm the only one discussing this stuff from this particular angle, a racial white rabbit angle, I will try to tackle these questions. But there's always been a Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden, and he's in my opinion, I first thought he was a nutball, but my first opinions of these things are usually out there. And Lieutenant Colonel Thomas E. Bearden, he has a PhD and MS in nuclear engineering, he has a BS in mathematics. He's not exactly an idiot, but he's been way ahead of the pack. And I don't know what's true in this particular angle and what's false, but he's been way ahead of the pack when it comes to torsion physics and EM weapons. It's all down one particular angle. When you get into the Germans in World War II, you get into the Glocke, the bell. Well, you're dealing with torsion physics, rotation. You know, as Richard Hoagland says it best, rotation, rotation, rotation. That's what you're dealing with. Now, what are you rotating? Well, we're going to get into that when we talk about the first event I was asked about, and that's the Norway spiral. I think the rumors that I'm hearing about it are probably true because it's the simplest explanation. And the Norway spiral is something that everyone listening can easily look up and you can see it. It's this big spiral in the air. And what happened was, Taliban was over there giving a speech, and the Russians were testing a missile, and the Russian missile just basically disappeared. It got zapped. Kind of like hitting a big bug zapper. It just got zapped. And the Russians went silent on it. My enemy's New Age group, the Pink Rabbit New Age groups, went silent. No one knew what it was, and then they came out and said that it must have been the UFO or something like that, because that's all what they say. But there's a more rational explanation. There is a harp-like field that the Europeans have. I believe it's north of Trondheim in Norway. And that harp-like field, and the reason I call it harp-like because it's similar to the field we have in Alaska, is by and large Northern European, and the people that operate in it are Northern European, and that's just a cover for quote-unquote German, because all Northern Europe is considered German by the Germans. And that doesn't mean if you live in Minnesota and you have blonde hair and blue eyes, you're considered German too. That's how they operate. Get used to it. But by and large, the question is, could it put up an array like that? And in theory, yes, because I know a little bit about SDI, Star Wars. Star Wars came out in the early 80s. In 1983, the individual that had the patents on the actual harp fields. Let me get his name for you here. The harp field patents in America were filed in 1983, and that were filed by Bernard Eastman. And in the file, in the actual patents themselves, it talks about, and this was all attached to Ronald Reagan's Star Wars. In the patents themselves, it has always been talked about that this harp field in Alaska could be used for missile defense. And that, of course, because a harp field, if you look at a harp field, it just looks like a bunch of arrays sitting out there. It looks like a bunch of antennas, old TV antennas of some kind. It doesn't look like much. But what you're dealing with is a very sophisticated physics, and the reason it's sophisticated is because you can be so creative with it. But what is torsion? What would in theory create that spiral? Well, torsion is the spiraling and folding and pleating in the fabric of space-time itself. And the big kicker is that certain parties on this planet believe they've mastered the engineering of it, or they believe it's engineerable. In other words, you're not only dealing with torsion, the concept of torsion, but the spiraling, folding, and pleating in the fabric of space-time itself, but that it's engineerable. So when you see that big circle up in the air, that's an actual torsion field, a torsion array. Many people believe. Out of the harp field in Norway, operated by and large by the Germans and Northern Europeans, or quote-unquote Europeans. Germans always like to disguise themselves as European. Well, it's the way they operate. And basically, they run Europe by and large. And people like them running Europe, so that's the way it goes. But by and large, that's what it would look like. If you go back to the 1983 patent, that's what you'd be dealing with. But if you're dealing with the spiraling, folding, and pleating in the fabric of space-time itself, and if it is engineerable, that's what you'd have. You put up a big field, and then it would just zap a missile. Why would it zap it? Well, it's like hitting a bug zapper. You're just hitting an actual field, a torsion field, and that's what it would be like. You know, some people say elements of it fell to Earth. Other people say it would disappear. It could actually do either. It's kind of like a big bug hitting a bug zapper. The guy sitting next to me says that's what Joseph P. Farrell, our Dr. Farrell, describes it as, and he's much better at describing these things than me. So I'll use that as an explanation. If a big bug hits an old-fashioned bug zapper, something real high-powered, if it's a big bug, half of it will fry, half of it will sit there until it fries off, and maybe some pieces fall. Other than that, if you see a little bug hit it, well, it'll just disappear. It's hitting a high, it's just hitting a field of electricity. But in this case, it's hitting a torsion field. The missile would hit a torsion field. And so, in regards to if this is doable, we don't know until something's been done. And that's just how our race operates. But I will say this. The Israelis have always said that they had a Samson option. You can look this up. Samson being the biblical Samson. S-A-M-P-S-O-N. And then they could put up 1,000 missiles over Europe and just destroy Europe as revenge for the Holocaust and stuff like that. Well, the Germans have taken a lot of shit, and I use that word blatantly. I'm going to blatantly use the word. There's no other word for it. And the German, especially German children, have taken a lot of shit. So you can cover little rabbit's ears, but this is simply a fact. I don't know any other way to express it, except to use foul language. From the Israelis and from Jew Rabbit International and from Team Pink Rabbit,